Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, The Sustainable Challenge, New Ways for Business to Tackle Waste, Water, and Energy. Thanks very much for joining us today. On the agenda, we have a few people with us. First off, we have Jake Ronay from the GLA. He'll be talking about the challenges facing the capital in terms of waste, energy, and water. Ben Brake from Whitbread. He'll be discussing the challenges of energy, waste, and water that translate into business drivers. Richard Kirkman from Veolia Environmental Services, covering best practice in waste. Mike Sewell from Dalkia, covering best practice in building energy services. And Richard Burns from Veolia Water, who'll be covering best practice in water. After that, we'll be ending with a Q&A session, so you'll be able to submit your question to the panelists. But before we actually begin with the presentations, I'm going to go over a few technical instructions. Please use the chat box for technical issues. It's on the right-hand side, so if you select Host from the drop-down menu, you can send a message over to me. Then there's the Q&A box. You can submit a question at any point during the presentation by typing into the Q&A box on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. We'll hold a Q&A session at the end, as I said. And finally, if you'd like to dial in, please use the chat box to contact me for more details on dialing into the session. So with that out of the way, I'm now going to go ahead and hand it over to our first speaker, Jake Ronay of the GLA. Jake, are you there?
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, can hear you just fine.
Great, okay, thank you. Great, well, thanks for having me on this. What I'll talk about is the challenges, I guess, that London faces and what the environment team and the energy team are doing in response to those challenges. My team focuses on energy efficiency retrofit. So although I can talk a bit about the wider environmental agenda, most of what I'll talk about will be about what we're doing in energy efficiency. Feel free to ask me any questions you like on other things, and I will do my best to answer them. But anyway, I'll get cracking. Hopefully everybody can see the slide. We've just moved on to a slide saying what the Mayor's environmental priorities are. Like most other cities, we take the environment very seriously. We have an environment team that's been going for, actually I couldn't tell you how many years, but for over 5 years certainly, in terms of people I know there. And probably like most other cities, we've got a multi-stranded approach looking at everything, the whole spectrum of environmental issues. We've divided the work into three priorities for this mayoral term: growing the green economy, creating a green and resilient city, and enabling a smart and resource-efficient city. I guess that they reflect some of the wider priorities that London has, particularly around jobs at this point in the sort of economy recession that we seem to never be quite getting out of. Also, kind of dealing with things like climate change, but also dealing with general environmental issues that affect cities that are growing, that have grown, that have infrastructure that needs updating. And cities that may have to adapt to the impacts of climate change or other influences, changing population and so on. So from the kind of slide here, hopefully you get a feel for the sorts of things that we look at. A range of programs are in place, and there's different things that go on. Just to pick out a couple, we've been looking at the jobs impact of environment and how can we stimulate the growth of green jobs. My programs that I work on, the energy efficiency programs, are quite resource intensive and actually create a large number of jobs. But so do other things such as green technology, and we're looking at how we can stimulate entrepreneurship and the development of technologies that are based in London and in the UK. We have major programs looking at green infrastructure, drainage, air quality, and we also are looking at what the future of the city might be with a smart cities pilot that's quite interesting and has a number of strands to it that link up probably all of the other environmental concerns, plus a few others such as transport, logistics, demographics, and so on. I will move on to my next slide, which is really talks about carbon. Carbon being one of the big sort of themes across that whole piece. The Mayor set some quite stretching carbon targets to reduce emissions in London by 60% by 2025 against the 1990 baseline. As you can see from the slide, buildings are a major part of London's emissions, and so in fact is retrofit, because most buildings in London are already quite old, but we also don't have a good track record in knocking buildings down. We tend to keep what we've got. So 80% of London's buildings are expected to still be in use in 2050, in fact. So that means that retrofit is quite a major part of the carbon reduction strategy, and that's where my team come in. In response to the need then to retrofit almost all of London's buildings by 2025, we've set up three main strands. One in the domestic sector, one for public sector, and one for commercial sector. I guess my job is to build these programs from not exactly humble beginnings. They've done quite a lot of work, but actually to meet the targets of retrofitting, for instance, every home in London, there's quite a big challenge ahead, and that's really what I've been doing over the last year. So Renew is the Mayor's domestic program, and we have had this running since about 2009. What it does is it coordinates the retrofit activities across London with as many with all the boroughs, and tries to stimulate retrofit activity by aggregating projects, by lobbying hard with DEC to get funding, and then allocating that funding to retrofit programs. The program has been primarily targeted at distributing money through the government CESP and CERT schemes, which you may be familiar with, which were loft insulation and some other energy efficiency measures. Through that program, we've delivered about 92,000 homes so far, saved around 18,000 tonnes of carbon. What I haven't put in here is how stretching the targets are. We're really looking, though, to be at over 1 million homes in London in the next 3 years. So as the Green Deal and Eco come in, we will be ramping up this program quite significantly, and we're actually just in the middle of procuring a team to come and support the one or two people who are in-house in my team at the GLA, and to boost that resource. And we're looking at some really innovative approaches in terms of how we can actually scale up retrofit activity across London. We've got some very exciting projects going on the eco side, working with social housing providers and looking at how we can merge their maintenance programs and overlay eco and energy efficiency works with the standard maintenance schedule over the next 10 years. And we're quite excited about that. On the next slide, we can talk a little bit about public sector workplaces, which has also got some quite exciting things going on. We set up a team here 2 or 3 years ago, which is now delivering, well, we're over 100 buildings at the moment, and we're hoping to get close to about 600 buildings in the next 2 years, working with a range of public sector organisations. And this is an interesting model in that we set up a team here to really enable these organisations. Public sector bodies don't always have in-house expertise or resources available to understand energy efficiency and to then go out and contract for it. So we've created a team that helps at every stage of the journey. We kind of hold their hands, if you like. And that's working very well. And in fact, that's the kind of model that we're going to use on the domestic programme for Renew. What we're facing here is a similar situation of needing to really scale up again over the next 10 years. And so we're looking at how do we do that, and how do we adopt, I guess, a sector-based approach. So rather than taking one building at a time, taking the entire schools estate, and we just launched a schools program the day before yesterday, which will aim to do 200 schools in the next 3 years. But actually the goal is to do every school in London. And also by linking up with Department of Energy and Climate Change, we're now able to work nationally with the team that they've set up, which uses the same model, and that allows us to work with the NHS in a way that we haven't been able to in the past. And so I think we've got some very good things in the pipeline here about bringing this program up a gear. Lastly, we have a commercial sector program, which has been a slightly lighter touch in that we have less influence over the commercial sector. To date, what we've done is we've had a 3-year relationship with the Better Buildings Partnership, which has been looking at best practice in energy efficiency in the commercial sector, what the challenges are, that kind of thing. That came to an end in March, and we're now looking at 2 new programs which will kind of build on that work. One is focused on the small and medium enterprises sector, SMEs, where we feel that there's a very significant need. There's quite a market failure in terms of SMEs being able to adopt energy efficiency measures. And we're hoping to have a couple of pilots ready to go in the next 2 or 3 months. And that will be quite interesting and quite new for the UK. And secondly, we're also looking at how we engage with the larger corporations, the ones who are maybe headquartered here but operate across the whole country. And we're looking at some ways that we can link up with DEC on that and launch something nationally. Again, hopefully something in the next 2 or 3 months will be coming out of that. Really, that's it for my slide. I'll be happy to take some questions later on. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Jake. Now I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to our next speaker, Ben Brakes from Whitbread. Ben, are you there?
I am. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me on. I'm just going to talk briefly about Whitbread and what we're doing around the energy, waste and water issues that we have, why we've chosen them in terms of what makes them a business driver. Good Together is our corporate responsibility package that everything to do with corporate responsibility sits under. We have a specific pillar for the environment which encompasses waste, water and energy. Just a quick intro on who Whitbread is. Whitbread's the largest budget hotel and restaurant company. Brands include Premier Inn, the Beefeater and Table. We also have the Costa Coffee chain, but I'll be focusing on the hotel and restaurant estate. We employ around 40,000 people and serve 22 million customers every month. So we have a lot of touch points, and if we can get the messaging right to our staff, we're hoping that we can actually filter that out to the people that come into our estate every day, and we can feed that information out again. So focusing on the drivers, really, we focus on the 4 C's, the cost. All of these issues that we mentioned, water, waste and energy, all have a cost associated to them, and without a doubt, each one of those is rising every year. You look at waste, you've got the landfill tax, which is rising, estimated to go up to £80 a tonne in 2014. The CRC tax, or whatever you want to call it nowadays, for us it costs us around £2.5 million. Now that wasn't there 3 or 4 years ago, so that's coming straight off of the bottom line, so shareholders want to see us reduce that as much as possible. And the utility bill itself, for us, it's around £50 million a year. That's including waste, water, and the energy. And again, all the bills are going up. So the more we can actually drive cost out of the business, put money back on the bottom line, it means that we're able to deliver a good budget hotel and restaurant, which is what people want. Within the compliance, environmental legislation is becoming more and more complex and wide-ranging. Within the waste sector, we've got new regulations coming in Scotland that aren't going to be applicable to the south of the country, so in the UK, in England rather. But making sure we're ahead of that compliance means that we can ensure that we don't have any major changes to the way that we operate. The Scottish regs come in, I believe, in January next year. We're already in a position that we're comfortable that our waste programme meets the regulations a year in advance. We don't have to rush around changing the way that we do things. Mandatory carbon reporting, again, that's another thing that comes into effect for us next year. We've already got the processes in place now because we saw that coming. And again, we don't have to rush around trying to put new processes in. Competitive advantage, like I say, putting money back onto the bottom line. We operate in the budget sector, so any overheads that we can cut back on means that we can deliver our product at a cheaper price than some of the competitors out there, which puts us in a good position. Also, when you start looking back into the supply chain, taking cost out of your suppliers hopefully means that you've got a cheaper product that you can buy from your suppliers. Again, driving cost out of the business. And again, company reputation. we have customers that come back to us time and time again, mainly because the product is good and it's what they're after at a price that they want. But if we can actually give them that same product, but actually say that we're environmentally friendly or we're green or whatever it is, that the label that they want, it will mean that they're going to come back to us even more. We haven't found yet that people will come to us just simply because we're greener than anybody else, but it's nice to think that they might do eventually. So we've identified these as drivers, and to make sure that we actually do something about it, we've created some targets which we've gone out to the public and said these are our public targets based on our 2008-9 baseline, because that's when we started looking at the targets. And they're quite bold. 25% reduction in carbon emissions by 2017, 25% reduction in water usage. We've just upped that to 30, I believe, because we're getting close. Achieved 0% waste to landfill by 2014, which is massive for us. At the moment, we're on about 93% aversion from landfill, but we've still got a long way to go, and the closer you get to a target, the harder it gets. And to actually take 10% out of the supply chain, focusing mainly on carbon, but we're also going to look at water and waste within that supply chain as well. So, like I said earlier on, we're up to around 93, 94% aversion from landfill at the moment. This was principally done by increasing the amount of recycling bins we have on site and reducing the amount of general waste. So the sites themselves only have a certain amount of space available to them. By removing the amount that they can put into a general waste bins means that you're kind of forcing them down to the route of recycling, because they just simply don't have the space to do anywhere else. If they contaminate the bins, they get fines, so it's really in their best interest to use the facilities that we've given them. And this was where we saw the big jump up from September up to where we ended up last year in February, which is around 93%. What we're looking at now is trying to get the remainder of that waste away from landfill, and what we've decided to do is we're going to focus on encouraging people to recycle by taking out that non-recyclable part and putting it into the recycling. We're working with our waste providers to ensure that the waste that we produce can go to areas that aren't sending it to landfill. So recycling is the principal part. Where we don't have recycling facilities, it will go to an energy from waste centre, but ideally we want to move everything over to a recyclable format. We use a anaerobic digestion for the majority of our food waste, and as this facility becomes more and more available, more of our sites will be able to do it. I believe it's something like 70% at the moment of our waste goes to anaerobic digestion, which is fantastic for us. And the reason that we're doing that is you can see on the graph now that the costs are going up. At the moment, we're looking at around £4 million spend on waste at the moment. If we didn't do anything, it would go up to somewhere over £5 million per year. The work that we've implemented already means that we're probably looking at around about £4 million a year. But if we can get the work right by moving to a recyclable, a mainly recyclable waste, then it can push it back down to under the £4 million mark, which again puts the money straight back on the bottom line. Going into the carbon part of it, as Jake mentioned, the buildings are a massive emitter of carbon. We own or operate over 600 hotels across the UK, somewhere in the region of 400 restaurants, so we've got a very large carbon footprint. We've been doing work on this since before 2008, but as you can see from the graph, we've made some great progress. This is all over a relative to sales bench line, so we're looking now at 22% reduction from our baseline. This is really done over two key streams. As Jake mentioned, retrofitting is key to a lot of this, but also new builds, because as a company we're growing, and hopefully in the next 4 or 5 years we'll put an extra 20,000 bedrooms to the estate. So it's important that we get the new build strategy right, so that our buildings that we're building now are fit for the future, but also the existing estate that we have, we need to make that as green as possible, hopefully up to the standards that a new build would actually be up to now. But it's finding that technology and putting it in, making sure that we don't disrupt the business that's running at the moment. We've focused primarily on lighting and heating at the moment, so we've spent £2.5–3 million installing LED lighting into the majority of our estate, which has been a no-brainer for us because it gives us a payback of under 3 years. So it's simple and straightforward retrofit solution. Looking at other technologies such as new types of boiler, CHPs and fuel cells so that we can create heat but at a lower CO2 price. And also looking at the insulation of the building. You know, a lot of these buildings that we have in the estate can date back a couple of hundred years, or they were old office blocks from the 1970s. Their insulation isn't up to scratch, so putting enough insulation in there to increase the performance of the building. And also water. It's often the forgotten part of these utilities because principally water's cheap. People don't notice it so much because compared to waste and energy, it just doesn't cost as much to come to your location. But there are parts of the UK which are heavily under water stress, and we need to make sure that our hotels and restaurants have access to water at all times, because without water we can't operate. So we decided that water was a very, very big part for us. Again, we've gone down to about 22% reduction in water across the group, which is great. We found that our water use is principally linked either to the preparation of food within the restaurant estate or within the hotel use. It's actually the guests and how they use water. When somebody comes to your hotel room, you don't want to tell them that they can't run the tap for 10 minutes when they're cleaning their teeth, or tell them to have a shower instead of a bath. They've paid their money, they can do what they like within that room, within reason. But hopefully we can put the kit in there that will lower the water but without actually affecting the customer at all. We use low flow shower heads with an aerator in it, so that it gives the feeling of a high pressure shower but much reduced flow rate. We use aerated taps in the bathrooms as well, and also using low water flush toilets as well. So it's about giving the customer the feeling of being able to use water as much as they want, but actually limiting the amount of water that's going through there. Within that as well, training is a principal one for us. The amount of times you go into a restaurant and you can see that the push tap that you put in 6 months ago has been taped up so that it's still running water because they need to wash the chickens before preparation or whatever it is. So no matter how clever you are at putting in technology, if people are desperate enough, they will always find a way of working around it. So for us, the communication and the training is at least as important as the technology that we put into the buildings. All in all, we've kind of got to the point now we're building green hotels and restaurants as standard. We're up to 15 now, with varying levels of technology within them. We properly started our new build program with Tamworth in 2008-09, which incorporated a ground source heat pump to produce the heating and cooling for the building. And building on that, we had Burgess Hill in 2009, which was BREEAM Excellent standard, which we increased the insulation of the building using a sheep's wool, triple glazed the windows just to make sure that the heat doesn't escape from the building, and then using mechanical heat recovery to take the heat out of a room where we didn't need it, pump it through to where we did need it, for instance, in the hot water for the restaurant. So becoming a lot more clever about how we use the energy within a building. So taking it from where you don't need it and putting it where you do. And that gave us a large amount of saving. We're now using that principle in the majority of our self-build new hotels and restaurants, by just being clever about how we use the energy. If we can reduce the carbon from creating the energy and then reuse that energy as many times as we can to either provide heat for the rooms or heat for the water coming out the taps, then we're going to lower our carbon footprint. Going forward, like I say, we're looking at new technologies. Fuel cells are an interesting one for us, maybe using gas to split the gas atoms so that we've got electricity and heat coming out of the unit. We're just starting a trial in Glastonbury where we're hoping to see some good results on that as well. But we're not limiting ourselves, and one of the principal parts is always trying something new. We've got about 16 technologies in the estate at the moment where we're analysing to see whether it works. Half of them won't work and they won't pay back in time, but without trialling this sort of technology, you just don't know what works and what doesn't. So yeah, I think that's pretty much me done. Like Jake said, I'll be around at the end if anybody wants to ask any questions. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks very much, Ben, for the presentation. So now we're going to go ahead and move over to Richard Kirkman. Richard, are you there?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to spend a few minutes just sharing our thoughts on sustainability. So let me get control of these slides. To us, no business or customer is the same, and in these times of austerity, which is the underlying context, I think, for most businesses, we think it's even more important to be listening to our customer base and about what they need and what they want. And with that in mind, I think we truly are entering a new age in terms of what's expected by our customers, and our response to that has been to come up with something and to try to deliver something significantly different. What we're doing and what this new best practice is, in a nutshell, over the last 20 years or so, we've moved from landfill to waste treatment, and I think everybody knows this story. We've diverted from landfill to recycling and recovery options, zero waste to landfill, and as you can see from the previous presentation, that's what our customers have wanted, and that's the mantra that we've lived by. But we think now that this is not really enough, and we think it's almost becoming the ordinary, and we want to take this a step further. So we're rapidly shifting to becoming a remanufacturing business, a business which designs production processes and uses materials which were once wastes and makes them into renewable products and energy sources. So this new era is really a new mindset for us about moving from waste, simply treating our customers' waste and transforming us into a manufacturing base for green products, green calories, mining the wastes to produce those sustainable new products. So for the first time, when we go and meet our customers to listen to their needs, we used to say, so what waste have you got? What have you got in the car park? How many bins have you got? The new conversation we're having is, what do you buy? What are your problems? What are your costs? And then we're talking to them about if they're interested in us producing renewable products for them to use, renewable energy for them to use, via some kind of production process, taking their waste directly back into the economic cycle of manufacturing and consumption. And this will enable us and our customers to develop a sustainable business model. We'll also continue to provide bespoke solutions for the more complex environmental challenges that many of our customers face. I want to give you a few examples because I think, if you don't have examples, it's just ideas, and some examples maybe where there's real tangible benefits. We want to mine the waste. I talked about mining the waste. We've collected what I would call the easy bits. Most places have bins with some card and plastic in them. But now we're looking at mining out more of the cardboard, more of the films, more of the plastics from the residual waste streams, trying to find new ways to enable our customers to easily and seamlessly extract those materials or extract them for them. Tailor-made solutions and scooping up all that value and then returning it back to our customer. That means valuable products that they buy, so packaging is a good example, they get one value from it when they buy it and use it, but then we'll pass back more value to them when we've collected it and put it back into the supply chain. So they get two bites of the cherry. Something a bit more revolutionary, something a bit more new and exciting is an initiative we've got called Soup and Biscuits. So what do I mean? Well, we'll collect food and wet wastes, which we will manufacture into soup by depackaging it, preparing liquid feedstocks for bioenergy processes such as anaerobic digestion. And why are we calling that soup? Well, if you imagine mushroom soup, it's obviously soupy, gloopy, sort of lumpy brown appearance. We'll manufacture it to a specification, regular composition and consistency, have a certain calorific value, a certain gas production potential, and that means it will have a downstream value. So depending on the application, we'll be manufacturing something, not just treating it. Similarly, for dry wastes, we'll produce biscuits generally being drier than soup, and produce different fuels of a regular composition for downstream processes, such as power stations, cement kilns as examples, and we'd be directly replacing coal and other fossil fuels there. Again, we're manufacturing something to a specification, producing something of a higher value. So you can see we're moving from treatment to production. Perhaps the best example of all that is our remanufacturing, our composting activity. We already transform about 200,000 tonnes of food and green wastes or bio-waste into about 100,000 tonnes of compost. Sorry, the slide's not moved on. Can you move that one on for me? Thank you. We operate about 7 facilities around the UK to a strict production and control criteria. So we're following a publicly available specification to produce something to a controlled temperature and production time and composition of output quality. It's really a production process. It's not a waste that we produce. It's technically, environmentally and legally a product. It's called ProGrow, and it's available in bags at very competitive rates this summer. So if you're passing by a civic amenity site that we operate, we'll be distributing it, and you can buy a bag and maybe grow some tomatoes. That's a really good example of waste to product, and I think key to driving all this is innovation. There's a few examples there, but I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm going to pick maybe the Ling Hall one, third one from the left. In Ling Hall in the Midlands, we're converting a landfill into an eco-park style production centre. So landfills are on the out. We don't want to landfill any things anymore, but we can do things with these resources, these sites. This is an example where we're really trying to stretch ourselves, thinking forward 10 years. We're calling it the Spider because it's a special industrial detritus recycling facility. That's a crazy acronym, sorry for that. But believe it or not, it's street sweepings that we're collecting. So that's the dust, the twigs and the cans that you see road sweepers sweeping up. And we'll process that material, which traditionally would just be landfilled. So we'll take out the twigs and the organic parts. That will go into a compost, which can be used for remediation purposes. The stones and the glass will go back into aggregates. The cans and the plastics that are in there will be directly recycled. And there's a small residue that's left, the real dust from the street, which we've identified has some precious metal content, and we're looking at if we can actually reprocess that back into palladium and platinum and the precious metals that are there. So it really takes the concept of mining the waste to its full logical conclusion. On a final note, I want to just talk about our infrastructure development. This has been a major activity for Veolia, given we've got the ability to provide utilities and renewable services. And if you indulge me with this slide and imagine a future of green walls and vertical farms and biofuel transport systems, well, the future is really realised. This is a facility we're actually building in Leeds at the moment. We've just recently obtained planning permission for it. And you can see it looks very much like the future we could imagine. It's bringing forward the future to now. And working with our customers, we want to deliver something today to solve these real practical problems of waste arisings and logistics and environmental needs, but also deliver something which will stand the test of time and still make sense in 20 years. So that's something flexible, adaptable, and ultimately we think that's what the environmental sector is all about. So I'm going to leave you there. Thanks for listening.
All right, thanks very much, Richard. Now we're going to go ahead and pass it on to Mike Sewell. Mike, are you there?
Yes, I am. Afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to have a little chat. What I'd like to really do is share a few sort of thoughts with you around best practice in building energy efficiency. I think there's been some good points made already on the session today, particularly by Jake and Ben. I think in terms of, when we look at the building infrastructure we're dealing with, over 80% is existing. So in many cases we're actually having to look at how can we actually get something we have work better. I think the other point that was made was that you actually have to experiment, that there are technologies which you need to apply and see will they work, and you can't do all that from a desktop basis. So hopefully I can sort of touch on a couple of those points as we're going through. I think first of all, it's probably to understand what are we trying to achieve with an effective energy service, and I think the key here is energy efficiency. Sometimes I think this has got a little sort of muddled in the past around cost avoidance, because there are things you can do just looking at bills and analysis of data where you can actually save money. And if you take that money and use it in an innovative way, in other words, capture that saving and then invest it into real physical measures to improve energy efficiency, then actually it's a great thing to do. So often, perhaps those funds are actually sort of disappeared into budgets elsewhere. So the focus here is actually what can we physically do in terms of how we operate within and use a space so we can actually reduce the energy consumption. That's the absolute key. I think when you look at any building, there's really three areas that sort of come into this, and which affect how that building operates and us within it. First of all, the fabric of the building, and that's actually back to the 80% piece. What exists there already: the walls, the roof, etc. Not that you can't change those things, but often very difficult to do so, not just because of a cost basis, but where's the building built, the listed issues. So you have to recognise what's the envelope that you're dealing with in terms of that building. Secondly then is what's in that building, what's actually turning and burning, what's the equipment that's in there, how's it been lit, how's it been heated. Those you can have more effect on. There's systems there which you can change, you can control. It starts to tie into a number of the other sort of measures that have already been talked about. And the third area is actually the user, the person or persons within the building. How are you actually physically using that space? And quite often that has very little correlation between the equipment that's there and actually the wider envelope, because we all get into the habits, the ways we like to operate things. Point was made earlier in terms of a hotel room, that I think as long as it's legal, we want people to do what they want to in there, and there's ways that we can suggest to people that the water pressure is what they want, yet it's still being done efficiently. And I think that's really important, but ultimately there is a piece there which is actually how can we actually get people to use their space better. And perhaps that's actually the best place to start rather than at the other end in terms of looking at the building fabric. So just sort of touching on that behavioural piece. I think historically, firm savings from improved behaviour within a building have almost been right up there with a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, almost something mythical. There is nothing mythical about behavioural energy savings. The real trick is to actually introduce something and to get people to operate buildings in the way that what they do on Friday, they'll still do next Monday. And this is perhaps where the problem's always sat, particularly within an outsourced energy efficiency contract, is that as a client, an owner organisation, perhaps you're willing to take a view as to how you can drive and influence your staff or your end users, but would someone else, a third party, be willing to actually guarantee that performance? And I think what we're now seeing is that from a market position, and certainly from where we are as Veolia, is that we can do that. There are ways that we can have confidence that people will actually use their spaces better. You can put behavioural energy meters in. They're not a smart meter. Smart meters just tell you what you're using. What you actually need is something that tells you what you should be using. Perhaps gives you some form of visual display, encourages you to do something about it. And within a wider programme, if you had multiple buildings, what competitions, what can we do between those spaces to actually get people to compete, to actually want to do better? And I think if you get those things right, what we're actually finding is you can get very real, significant energy savings within how people use the space before we actually look at the kit that's within it, the equipment, and before we worry about the fabric within it. And that is a major step forward, I think, in terms of where we're going now today in terms of energy services. Coming to sort of the bigger picture, it's also very important to sort of look at the whole piece in a very joined up way. It's not a case of turning up at a building and thinking, oh, I read an article yesterday, I know I'm going to throw some photovoltaics on the roof, or I should reclad it, or I should change the windows. What you need to do is actually think, well, what are the various processes of how that energy is being used within the building? And what you can see in this diagram is really those sort of four key areas. You've got the operating efficiency. So in other words, how's the energy user using it? We've touched on that. The building efficiency. How does the building physically operate within its environment, its envelope? How's the energy being moved around that building? I mean, is it radiators? Is it hot air? If so, is it being done effectively? Does it take? Is there things we can do with there to actually make that energy movement more efficient? And then, how's that energy being produced? There's something coming into the building, be it oil, gas, whatever. How's that being converted? How's that energy actually being moved around the building? And to look at this properly, you need to look at those four pieces joined up. It's not a case of one, then the other, then the other. And certainly, from our perspective, and if the first thing you do is you spend an awful lot of capital on some major new way to produce the energy in that building, but you haven't actually focused on how that building performs or how the end user operates it, you won't see the benefits that you're looking for, and you certainly won't get anywhere near the sort of business cases and paybacks that I think both Jake and Ben are looking for. I think as a sort of final component within this, it's actually what has happened. I think there's probably a lot of business cases out there where good money has been spent in the arena of energy efficiency, and ultimately the question has been asked, has it happened? Has that performance saving been delivered? And to take a very simple analogy, I mean, you can actually go and do some great work. You could save half the energy being used within that building. But if you're not actually aware that halfway through that year the energy price doubled, at the end of the year, if you purely look at it from a financial perspective, you could have something which says, hang on, we've invested this money, we can see no benefit. But reality is, with actually understanding the energy cost and the data or the use of the energy, you could actually see where that benefits come from. But I think, this has sort of driven, I think, some cynicism in the marketplace, and I know certainly the clients I talk to, there's a lot of concern as to, are they actually seeing the benefits they've paid for? So it's very important here that, we put a very robust performance management piece in place where we're monitoring and measuring buildings before, during and afterwards, and continue to measure afterwards, because in effect a delivered energy efficiency project is the very best case study, the very best example we can have of selling and developing a future energy service. And certainly I think where this ties in very well is within the recent changes in terms of the IPMV requirements in terms of a standardisation process now in terms of measurement and verification. It's so important that we now actually have a code by which we can actually deliver that to. And as an organisation, we embrace involving third parties in this. We encourage that contracts should be set up that there is external audit, so that actually that data and information is taken and measured, so we can actually get rid of this concern as to how is that saving being achieved? Is it real? Because it is, and we need to make sure the data can actually demonstrate that. So finally, really in summary, and I think to capture all this, is that we need to have savings within buildings, and you should expect them to be financially guaranteed. Any energy efficiency provider worth their salt should be to guarantee that performance. That's what we're here to do. There needs to be a very transparent contractual relationship. You need to understand where you were before, where you are afterwards, how those savings are generated, how those savings are shared, how does the energy service partner make some return from that, how do you as the client, the end user, benefit from that. And ultimately, the building's use of energy needs to be optimised to what needs to take place within that building. I think that comes back very well to the analogy of the hotel earlier, is that there is no point designing a building to be so efficient you then actually cannot use it for the purpose which it's there for. So for every building it's different, but if you can get the financial guarantees right and you can actually get the performance management right, benefits are there to be had. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks very much, Mike. And now we'll go ahead and hear from Richard Burns. Richard, are you there?
Hi, thanks Vanessa. Hi, good afternoon everyone. My name is Richard Burns. I act as a consultant to Veolia Water, and in this presentation I'm going to provide you with a brief overview of Veolia Water globally and locally. I'll explain some of the challenges and sustainable water supplies, water use, conservation and disposal. Within the next decade, approximately 1.8 billion people worldwide will be living in areas of absolute water scarcity. In 2011, 783 million people, that's 11% of the global population, had no access to safe drinking water, and 1.1 billion people, that's 15% of the global population, had no access to sanitation that we would expect. The difficult economic climate combined with uncertainties brought about by climate change and greater competition for resources is driving public authorities and industrial companies alike to constantly strive to produce more from less. Veolia Water, with its focus on innovation, offers them recovery solutions for every resource to be found in water and wastewater. So what does Veolia Water do? What's its business about? primarily, it's in the broad sense, it's in these three areas. It's actively involved in managing water and wastewater services for local public authorities and industry. It designs technological solutions and builds the infrastructure needed to deliver these. And it constructs, rehabilitates and maintains networks and associated infrastructure. Over the past 2 years, Veolia Water has redefined its business. And the slides seem to have stuck. In terms of service, and this approach combines high-performance solutions to deliver service to an improved service to the client, where we are now looking for constant quest for excellence in sustainable water management, delivered through our technology and building resilience into networks. I think that's a word that we hear increasingly, particularly in this sector, about resilient infrastructure, which has to combine and combat the effects of climate change. That's primarily drought and flooding as far as our sector is concerned. Water quality is a principle, and ultimately we're looking to serve the end customer as efficiently as possible. That's one element of the new business approach. Secondly, we deliver value, and how we do that is by optimizing the use of natural resources as far as water is concerned. That includes looking at alternative sources, extracting energy from water, the water systems, recovering valuable materials, and enhancing the natural environment generally. And finally, we do all this responsibly. We have to balance our commitment. We have a duty as a global leader in this sector to set the example. And that involves reducing our negative impact on the environment, working towards decarbonisation. Significant proportion of what we do is to move water around, and 1 ton of water, one cubic metre of water weighs 1 ton. So moving that water around requires a lot of energy. So we actually are striving to decarbonise our processes. And we have local action to ensure that we've got sustainable resources. Some quick facts about Veolia Water. It's a global company. It's in around 50 countries worldwide. It's got around about 89,000 staff. And it's present in the UK with around about 2,000 staff, and it serves over about 3-4 million people in the UK. Overall, worldwide, it serves 100 million people with clean, safe drinking water. And of that, it processes around 9.5 billion cubic metres of water in 4,676 water treatment plants. Likewise, it treats the effluent from 71 million people, and in 3,500 plants, and that's around about 7 billion cubic metres of sewage treated per annum. Supporting the quest for sustainable solutions for clients' water management problems is a network of around 900 researchers based in various centres around the world, and it works closely in partnership with other organisations and with academic institutions. As a group, Veolia Environment invests in the order of €138 million per annum in R&D. In terms of responsibility, a key goal for the group is reduction of its greenhouse gas emissions. And in 2012, year on year, for Veolia Water, the greenhouse gas emissions were reduced by 21.5 million metric tonnes. So that's broadly what the business is about. People will be familiar with the water cycle, the large water cycle, water evaporating and being condensed in hillsides, falling on the ground and then being collected, used and sent back. However, the company actually operates within the inner water cycle, so it extracts water from the environment, from either storage or from underground aquifers or rivers. It distributes that through a extensive network of pipes to domestic customers, commercial customers, and to industrial customers. And it then treats the waste from those customers and either discharges it back clean to the environment, or recycles and reuses it, or converts the organic materials and other aspects of the waste into energy or reusable resources. Innovation is at the heart of delivering sustainable outcomes for society, business and the environment. Here are but a few examples of innovation which the company is developing for its clients. In all cases, it is seeking responsibly to maximise the value of the water resource and provide an effective service to its clients, society and the environment. I'll mention them briefly here and provide some more examples in the rest of the presentation. So here we have some examples of maximising value from water. That's about the water impact index and carbon footprinting. I'll talk about those shortly. We provide a lot of water information on water conservation and educating people. Sustainability is all about following next generations. So we believe actually that we need to educate at the earliest stage in the education process to engage people in changing behaviour. In the United States, they set up a program called Growing Blue, and the reference is there. We extract energy from water as well in processing water. That's conventional hydropower from gravity-fed dams through to in-pipe turbine solutions, which in pressurized systems, you can actually extract energy from those. We optimize energy conservation in, as I said, a lot of what Veolia Water is about is moving water around. So we actually optimize particularly our electricity use. We were actively seeking alternative water resources, particularly in water-stressed areas. Things like rainwater harvesting we use quite extensively, desalination, even through to a concept of the toilet to the tap recycling, which we have a plant which we've operated for a number of years in Namibia, which actually takes effluent from the sewage plant and then treats it to a drinking water standard. And intelligent networks. And we've come up with some novel social business economic models, such as working with Grameen Bank in Bangladesh to seek local investment in water infrastructure. The other area is to derive maximum value from wastewater. A lot of this is around generating energy from the organic products of sewage, conventionally through digestion, which is being practiced for a significant number of years. But it's also novel ways of using heat recovery from sewage, which comes into the sewage works at an elevated temperature. Using, again, micro hydropower. And interestingly, and something I'll talk about briefly shortly, generating biopolymers from sewage. We look at a lot of byproduct recovery. So, for example, in one industrial client, we had problems with nitrate in his effluent. We actually extract the nitrate and market that into the fertilizer sector. Okay. So these are just some of the examples. These are the bioproducts and heat recovery. Okay, water is a global problem. We've heard that. In fact, we heard Ben say that the reason is that water's cheap. And yes, it is. But if you don't have it, I'm afraid you don't live for very long. 70% of the Earth is covered with water, but only 0.7% of that is actually available as fresh water, and only less than 0.1% is actually accessible for human use. With growing population and growing economic demands, That's created this problem of water stress. Veolia has actually developed a water footprint indicator, such as the Veolia Water Impact Index, and that's being used to give more insight into the vulnerability of an activity to water challenges. In the current economic context, decision makers are looking at an even more pragmatic and straightforward metric, cash. Recognising the impact of the activities on water resources is primarily local and regional, and a new tool to help understand this was developed, and this is the Water Impact Index. What is generically known as water footprint usually only considers volumetric aspects of water use. This impact index, however, considers the dynamics of quantity, quality of the water abstracted, treated and discharged, the water stress for the water catchment, and looks at that in a holistic way. And it provides a clear understanding of the issues and the pinch points in the water systems in a much broader sense. Combined with the carbon footprinting tool that Veolia has also developed, this allows industrial and municipal clients to actually understand the overall environmental impact of their activities. So, for example, in Milwaukee, in the metropolitan area water cycle, they used the index and carbon footprinting to collection and treatment of water in the area, and change disinfection processes and increased efficiency to actually reduce the impact. And similarly with an industrial client, L'Oreal, in Jiangsu in China, the biological treatment plant had these tools applied, and it was able to reduce its water and carbon footprint significantly. Intelligent water networks, these are more than just smart meters, and it's an area we see as being very important for future water conservation and efficiency developments. What are they? They're a fully integrated set of product solutions and that provide remote continuous monitoring, diagnosis and control. So this is more than just metering. It's actually ultimately working towards forms of artificial intelligence and understanding more about the issues that are involved in the network. This gives greater transparency in water quality, quantity and resilience of the network. It leads to more information, better information, and ultimately to encourage water conservation. And it delivers an improved service to the end customer and makes transparency much more available to the general public and customers overall. So it actually monitors leakage and pressure management. Very often leaks are a result of bursts in the network caused by overpressurization. And as a consequence, smart, intelligent networks allow better understanding and management and distribution of that pressure. Allows prioritization of resources to replace and renew those networks, and increases efficient operation and maintenance. So the need to send staff out to go and fix a burst is reduced, for example. And it also gives real-time in water quality monitoring. These are just two of the products that Veolia Water produces. This is a smart meter produced by Home Rider, a subsidiary of Veolia, and likewise Endotech, another subsidiary, produces this eponymously named Captor, which is a system, a remote sensor for water quality. In the UK, we've actually deployed these in Folkestone, in Folkestone and Dover Water Services, now Affinity Water, and delivered the first radio network for smart metering, covering around 6,000 properties. We're working for Thames Water as a customer in delivering smart metering throughout its whole network, and we have 100% coverage in London Luton Airport as a private operator for smart metering and smart meter reading. I'll go quickly through this. This is just to demonstrate that we take environmental ideas and concepts into consideration throughout from concept, design, right through to final build and operation. This is North Downards in Northern Ireland. It looks nothing like a sewage treatment plant I was used to seeing. It's built into the bank side, it's entirely covered. And when I first drove up to this site, it looked like a pharmaceutical plant, which I was more used to working in, from the outside anyway. This is the new plant at Peacehaven that Veolia has built for Southern Water in the UK. It's got one of the largest green roofs in Europe, actually. And this was not just about a landscaping activity. This is actually considered from an ecological footprinting point of view as well. And speaking of ecological footprint, we apply this and work in partnership with organisations like Scottish Wildlife Trust in sensitive catchments that we operate, such as the Almond River in Scotland, where we've actually assessed and balanced habitats and species and manage that very actively. Finally, I'd like to get on to concept of the biorefinery, mentioning recovery from waste. As we've seen from the examples of innovation I've touched upon, wastewater is opening up new opportunities and sustainable solutions. Imagine bringing these together under one single roof of a wastewater treatment plant, working better together, and that's about bringing forward the concept of a biorefinery. So exactly what is that? It's a single wastewater treatment works that brings together innovative approaches to extracting maximum value from the wastewater resource. That's extracting energy from the sewage stream itself, as well as from the sewage sludge by digestion and energy generation of combined heat and power plant, developing green chemicals and using green chemicals, generating clean water that can be reused from everything from industrial, agricultural and even domestic reuse. So this completes the loop as far as the closed cycle system is concerned on wastewater. And finally, I'd like to talk about a very exciting new development, which is that of biopolymers. Our research and innovation team has been working to develop new methods for producing and then extracting biopolymers from wastewater. They're used as a base material by using genetic modification to bacteria and culturing bacteria to extract these materials. They've actually been used to produce base plastic material for products such as injection plastic mouldings and even plastic shopping bags in Brussels. So we've proven the concept and now working with global chemical companies to commercialise the process. So that's a very quick and rapid tour of Veolia Water and some of the exciting innovations it's doing. About 500 tonnes of bioplastics could be derived from 100,000 inhabitants. So finally, I'd like to just refer you back to the comment Ben made at the beginning of his presentation about water being a forgotten component. Yes, it is cheap, but when people think about water, they only think about it when they turn the tap on and it's not there, when it comes out of the tap and it looks or smells strange, or when they have to pay their water bill. Water is essential to life on our blue planet, and it's too valuable to use only once. Thank you for listening. I'll be happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you very much, Richard, for that. Now we're going to quickly go into a Q&A session. Since we're pretty much close in time here, I'm going to go ahead and ask about 3 or 4 questions, and we'll continue the discussion online or via email. So first off, this question is for Ben. Ben, do your carbon figures include the time, travel / distance to recycling facilities? Are these plants local or are more needed in your opinion?
Okay. The figures that I was talking about don't include the carbon taken to travel to locations, and as such, we don't tend to incorporate that sort of CO2 in our figures. We do track it, but we don't include that in our figures. But in terms of the availability of AD plants, we'd like to see more. You know, in an ideal world, there'd be one a short hop down the road so that you don't have the associated vehicle emissions. Understand it's difficult, and you know they do take up a bit of space, and not everybody wants them. But I do think that we need to do more in terms of encouraging this technology to be rolled out in a lot more areas so that we can get our waste to them. We're working with other restaurateurs about using one lorry to pick up from multiple sites to go to a location, but some places in the UK don't have access to AD plants at all, so it's just simply not possible.
Okay, thank you for that answer, Ben. For our next question, this came during Richard Kirkman's presentation. Richard, if you have any thoughts on this. Is there any visibility on how much fossil fuel could be offset if all the UK's applicable waste was manufactured into biscuits?
Yeah, I mean, if we were to use all the solid waste that currently isn't being utilised, we could contribute about 10% of our renewable energy needs, and that's about 3% of the total energy supply. So it's an incredibly important part of our energy diversity mix. It's a low, partly renewable energy source, and we can make more of it. So, yeah, we pretty much know. It depends precisely where it was to go, if we send it to a power station or a cement kiln, the energy efficiency we get back. But generally speaking, it can contribute about 10%, so really important.
All right, thanks for that. Back to Ben for the next question. Do you already or would you consider recording consumption levels on a room-by-room basis at your hotels?
We do. We actually track carbon per available room rather than occupied room, because the base load of a hotel is pretty stable. The occupancy of the room, it varies a little bit, but not by a huge amount. Again, in collaboration with some other hoteliers, we've just launched, or it's just coming out, a measurement called the HCMI, which is Hotel Carbon Measurement Index, I think it's called, which other hoteliers can use to calculate the CO2 per available room. It sets benchmarks and sets the boundary really for recording CO2 emissions. And what we're hoping to do is be able to put that information on our website so that you'll be able to look at which hotel you're interested at, and it would tell you how much carbon per night stay it would emit. So you could, if you wanted to, choose a low carbon hotel, or you could decide that you just wanted to know that was a lower carbon one than just down the road. I don't think people are in the position yet to choose their hotel based on the carbon footprint, but I think giving people the information, it might make them think a little bit more about it and make that choice.
All right, thanks very much. I'm actually going to make this the final question of the day, just to keep an eye on time. This last question is from Nikki. How do we enable smaller companies to experiment with new approaches when they might not be able to afford something which may not work or may take a long time to pay off? Mr. Richard Kirkman, would you be able to tackle this one, and then maybe other input from other members?
Yeah, well, for SMEs, for our small or medium-sized customers, I think it is more difficult for them to experiment and to do new things, but we're doing part of that innovation for them. So we're doing that together, lowering that burden, putting out different services, a kind of smorgasbord of different services that they can pick and choose to use. So it might be that we give them bags so they can put their plastic into it. Sorry, someone was talking in my ear. I was being a bit distracted. We'll give them different services, and they can pick and choose which ones they want, and that will be lowering their costs and giving some of the value of the recyclers back to them as well.
Okay, that's great. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and close for the day. I'd like to thank all our attendees for participating today. We had a number of questions, comments, and ideas come through, and I know some of these have been addressed in the Q&A box. For those that haven't yet, we'll follow this up with you offline, off of the webinar session. So I'd like to also thank all of our panelists today for making it through the session and for their great presentations. Thank you, Jake, Ben, Richard, Mike, and Richard for holding this session today. The audio recording and relevant info will be posted shortly on the Waste Management Group on the 2 Degrees site. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone again and wish you a very great day.